Hey everyone. January's just around the corner, right? And I bet you're wondering what kind of weather we're in for, especially with all this talk about a possible deep freeze.
Yeah, it's definitely been making the rounds.
It has. You guys sent in a bunch of articles on weather forecasting and some predictions specifically for January. Seems like the perfect combo for a deep dive, don't you think?
Absolutely, it's a great topic.
So, I've seen these long-range forecasts, and some are calling for some seriously cold temperatures. I mean, we're talking maybe even snow in places that hardly ever see it. Makes you wonder how accurate these long-range forecasts can really be?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, how much can we trust these predictions weeks or even months in advance?
Exactly. And is the eastern U.S. really going to be in for a deep freeze? I mean, should we be bracing ourselves or what? Luckily, I've got an expert here to help us unpack all this. So when we talk about forecasts this far out, how do they even work?
Well, it's definitely a bit trickier than forecasting, say, tomorrow's weather. I mean, it's like imagine trying to predict the exact score of a football game before it even starts.
Ooh, good analogy.
You can maybe get a sense of which team might be favored, looking at their past performance and all that. But to actually nail down the specifics, that's a whole other ball game.
So are you saying we should take those long-range forecasts with a grain of salt? Or
Not necessarily. It's more about understanding what they can tell us and what they can't.
makes sense.
One of the articles you sent from the Washington Post, it highlights how forecast accuracy can vary wildly across the US. Like take Miami, for example. Their forecasts are usually pretty spot on, sometimes up to a week out.
Really?
Yeah, they benefit from the stability of the ocean.
Yeah.
But then you look at a place like Paonia, Colorado,
Oh, Colorado, yeah.
even a 24-hour forecast can be a gamble there.
Wow. Why is that?
Well, it's because the middle of the country, it's kind of like a weather battleground.
Yeah.
All these air masses are constantly clashing, making predictions way more tricky.
So geography really plays a huge role. Fascinating. Yeah. So where does the eastern U.S. fall on that spectrum? Are we more like Miami or more like Colorado?
Good question. The East Coast is somewhere in between. I mean, we do have the ocean's moderating influence, which helps, but we're also vulnerable to those volatile air masses sweeping down from Canada.
So kind of the best of both worlds? Or maybe the worst? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe a bit of both. Think of it this way. Miami's weather is like a perfectly rehearsed orchestra. Everything's predictable and harmonious.
Okay, I like it.
Now, Peonia, that's more like a free jazz ensemble full of
Right.
improvisation and surprises.
That's a great way to put it.
And the East Coast, we're somewhere in the middle, like a blend of structure and spontaneity.
All right, I'm starting to get the picture. So when we see these long-range forecasts hinting at this big January cold snap, what should we be paying attention to? Should we be looking at exact temperatures?
Well, specific details like exact temperatures and snowfall amounts, those are nearly impossible to predict accurately that far out.
So what should we be focusing on then?
It's more about the overall trends and potential pattern shifts. Think of it like identifying the genre of the song, but not knowing every single note.
Gotcha. Trends over specifics. So what are the trends telling us about this possible January deep freeze?
So the weather company outlook you sent, it points to this pattern shift that could favor much colder than average temperatures across a big chunk of the east, while the west coast, they're probably going to keep seeing those mild conditions.
Interesting. So what's driving this pattern shift?
It's all tied to this thing called the Pacific North American Pattern, or PNA for short. It's like a
Uh-huh.
giant seesaw in the atmosphere.
A seesaw? Oh, I like that. So when one side goes up,
Exactly. When the west coast goes up with those warmer temperatures, the east coast goes down, bringing in that cold Canadian air. And for January, the PNA is expected to be in that seesaw down position for us here in the east, which could bring that significant chill.
makes sense. But you mentioned forecast this far out can be tricky, right?
Oh, definitely.
So how much confidence can we really have in these predictions based on this PNA pattern?
That's the million-dollar question, because even these trends can change, and forecasting beyond a week or so, it involves a lot of uncertainty. It's like a line of dominoes. A small nudge at the beginning can totally change how they fall at the end.
Oh yeah, the butterfly effect.
Exactly.
Hmm.
The atmosphere is similar. I mean, little variations today can lead to huge shifts in the forecast down the line.
So we've got this potential pattern shift on the horizon. Could bring a serious chill to the east. But the specifics, those are still pretty unclear.
Exactly. It's like we have the outline of a painting, but not the colors or the details that'll bring it to life.
Okay, I'm with you. So
Good.
let's talk about those missing colors and details. Everyone's buzzing about this January cold snap, especially the possibility of snow reaching farther south than usual. What can we expect?
Well, several sources, including those articles by Chris Dolce on weather.com, they're suggesting a potentially significant cold snap in the eastern U.S., maybe sometime in early to mid-January. And get this, there's even speculation that it could be colder than the deep freeze we had back in December 2022.
Whoa, colder than last December. That's saying something. And I think I even saw a social media post about possible snow in some pretty unexpected places.
Yeah.
How likely is that to actually happen?
Well, that's where things get a bit more uncertain. While the overall pattern does seem to favor winter weather dipping farther south, predicting exactly where and when any snow might fall, that's still beyond what we can do right now.
So like snow in the deep south, maybe even Florida. It's not impossible, but
It's too early to say for sure. What I can say is the overall setup favors a dip in the jet stream, which is what you'd need to bring that cold air and winter weather much farther south.
yeah.
But the specifics, like where the heaviest snow might be or how long the cold air will stick around, that's still up in the air.
So sounds like those of us in the eastern U.S. should probably get ready for a chilly January. But the specifics of how cold and where the snow might fall, those are still a mystery.
Yep, that's a good way to put it. Meteorologists use something called pattern recognition to figure out potential scenarios. It's kind of like we're looking for rhymes in a song to predict what the next verse might be.
Oh, I see.
But just like with music, weather can always throw in some unexpected twists and turns.
Keeps us on our toes. So what's the bottom line for our listeners? Should they be digging out those snow shovels or just grabbing an extra blanket?
The best advice is to stay informed and be ready for anything. Keep an eye on those forecasts, especially as we get closer to January. And be prepared for potentially chilly temperatures, especially in the eastern half of the U.S.
Sound advice. And speaking of staying informed, this deep dive isn't over yet. We'll be right back to explore what this pattern shift could mean for those places that don't usually get much winter weather. Stay tuned.
You know what's really interesting about this potential cold snap? It's the fact that those colder than average temperatures could reach way farther south than usual.
Yeah, like places that aren't exactly used to bundling up.
Exactly. We're talking about places that might even see a bit of snow. I mean, can you imagine? Snow in Florida.
Not exactly your typical winter wonderland, right?
Right. And this is where it's so important to understand what these long-range forecasts can and can't tell us.
So are you saying folks down in Florida should be digging out their winter coats? Or is it too early for that?
Well, it's probably not a bad idea to have those winter clothes ready, just in case. But maybe hold off on building those snowmen for now. I mean, weather this far out, it can be unpredictable.
Definitely.
Even places known for their mild winters, they should be prepared for anything.
So let's say those forecasts are right, and we do get this cold snap, with those frigid temperatures and maybe even some snow in the deep south. What kind of impact could that have?
That's a great question. From an ecological standpoint, a sudden freeze, especially a really intense one, could be tough on plants and animals that aren't used to that kind of cold.
Like, wouldn't they be able to adapt?
Well, it's not always that easy. Remember that big freeze in Texas back in 2021?
Oh, yeah. That was rough.
It really messed things up, crippled the power grid, caused billions of dollars in damage to agriculture.
It's amazing how vulnerable we can be to these extreme weather events,
Yeah.
even with all our modern technology.
It really is. And it's not just about the infrastructure either. You got to think about those ripple effects on entire ecosystems.
Like what?
A sudden freeze can disrupt all those delicate balances. It could impact everything from how well our crops grow to even wildlife populations.
It's easy to just think about how inconvenient a cold snap can be. Like, it's cold, I don't want to go outside. But those ecological consequences are huge.
They really are. And we can't forget about the impact on people, society as a whole. Imagine the challenges for places that aren't used to dealing with snow and ice. I mean, roads and buildings might not be designed to handle it.
Yeah, good point.
Transportation could become a nightmare. There's the risk of power outages with everyone cranking up their heat. And even just doing everyday stuff could become a lot harder.
It's like even a short cold snap could throw things into chaos for those folks.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to stay informed and be prepared. I mean, if you're in an area that doesn't typically see winter weather, take some time to learn about how to protect your home, your car, yourself.
Like, what kind of things should people be doing?
Simple things, really. Like protecting your pipes from freezing, learning how to drive safely on icy roads, making sure you're ready for a possible power outage. It's always better to be safe than sorry.
Couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to Mother Nature. So we've got this potential for a major pattern shift. Could bring a deep freeze to the east, maybe even some snow in the south, but the details are still pretty murky. What's your advice for our listeners as we head into January?
Just stay curious, stay informed, and don't be afraid of a little uncertainty. Keep checking those forecasts as we get closer to January. And remember, forecasting, it's a science that's always evolving.
So basically, just got to be flexible and roll with whatever old man winter throws our way.
Exactly. And hey, who knows? Maybe we'll even see a few snowflakes in some places we never expected. That's the beauty of weather. It always keeps us guessing.
And speaking of guessing, this deep dive isn't over yet. We'll be right back to explore the world of long-range forecasting and what these trends could mean for the bigger picture of climate change. Don't go anywhere.
It's really amazing how far we've come in terms of predicting the weather. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when a 5-day forecast was like the cutting edge.
Right. And now we're talking about these pattern shifts weeks and weeks out.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing.
It really is. But these long-range forecasts, they also kind of highlight how much we still don't know about the atmosphere.
Totally. It's so complex.
It's this constant dance between, what we can measure, what we can model, and then there's all this inherent uncertainty.
Yeah, that uncertainty is what keeps things interesting, right?
Definitely. Keeps us on our toes.
So speaking of models, that Washington Post article you sent, it mentioned those supercomputers, Dogwood and Cactus, crunching all that data to generate these forecasts.
Yeah, those things are incredible.
But it makes you wonder, are we hitting a wall in terms of predictability, even with all that computing power?
That's a really good question, and it's a tough one. I mean, yeah, these supercomputers are amazing tools, but they can only work with the information we give them.
Right.
And the atmosphere, it's so incredibly complex, you know? Countless variables, feedback loops. We're still trying to figure it all out. It's like, imagine trying to create a perfect simulation of the ocean.
Ooh, good analogy.
You could model the currents, the tides, but capturing every single ripple and wave. Impossible.
So no matter how advanced our technology gets, nature's always going to have a few tricks up its sleeve.
Absolutely. And that's why I found that other article you shared so interesting, the one about the limits of weather forecasting.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
It really emphasizes that even as our models get more and more sophisticated, we still need human forecasters.
They bring that intuition to the table, right, the experience.
Exactly. There's a quote in that article that I really liked. It says, "I use models, but you can't always trust the models on surface value. You have to use expertise and experience."
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It's this perfect blend of science and human insight. Like, imagine a master chef using a recipe as a guide.
Okay, yeah.
They use the recipe, but they also rely on their senses, their years of experience, to create something truly special.
It's that extra touch that makes all the difference.
And in weather forecasting, especially when we're talking about these long-range predictions, that human element is crucial.
So what's the takeaway for us, the average folks just trying to figure out if we need a coat tomorrow? How should we be looking at these long-range forecasts?
I'd say the key is to be curious, but also informed. Don't just blindly trust what you see on your weather app or hear on the news. Dig a little deeper. Think about where that information's coming from. And remember, even the fanciest models are just one piece of the puzzle.
So it's about embracing that mystery,
Yeah.
accepting that we'll never completely figure out the weather.
Exactly. And honestly, that's what makes it so fascinating.
Well said. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Forecast accuracy, this potential January cold snap, the science of meteorology. I mean, the list goes on. But as always, our deep dive doesn't end here. We've explored these long-range trends, this possible chilly January, but now it's your turn, dear listener. What will you take away from all this? What questions will you keep thinking about? As we head into a new year, a new season, let's keep our minds open to the amazing, complex world around us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, stay curious.